Awesome. So thanks, Del, for joining us from Real Seekers. So for everyone, Del's channel website will be in the comments, so please go there and check him out as well. And thank you, Del, for joining us today on this Monday morning. So first of all, Del, a bit of introduction about yourself. I know you might have something you want to share, so by all means, please share your screen. And then first of all, just a bit about yourself, who Del is, Real Seekers, and how you got into the Shroud as well. I think that's always interesting.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I'm happy to be here and happy to support your channel. Even though you
Thank you.
are a Shroud skeptic, that doesn't matter. We're on the same team, I think, and we're both interested in truth. So I'm happy to support your channel. So there's my slides. Just let me know if it is showing up.
Yeah, I can see it, and I have shared it on the recording as well, so it should be there. Yeah, awesome.
Awesome. All right, cool. So yeah, the first thing is just a little kind of introduction as to who I am. So my name is Dale Glover. I'm the host of a podcast called Real Seekers. And on the podcast, I cover various topics in the philosophy of religion, theology, Christian apologetics, and that sort of thing. But what I'm here today for is I'm kind of famous for this series of mine called the Shroud Wars series, where I focus on the evidence for the Shroud of Turin. So yeah, it was really Gary Habermas who first introduced me to the Shroud and taking the evidence seriously. I've been fascinated for years afterwards, looking at the amazing quality of the evidence, both scientific and historical. I've been studying the Shroud in detail, I would say, about 2016. So, Gary introduced it
Yeah.
to me in around 2010. And, I did my couple rounds of research, but the most intense was starting in 2016, which led up to my conversion in 2018 there. I've done multiple detailed podcasts on the Shroud with various experts on both sides. And I'm a member of the Shroud Science Group as well, which is kind of a private group, by nomination only to get in
Yeah.
there. And they discuss a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, so I take the pro Shroud position. I believe that there's sufficient evidence to demonstrate that the Shroud is authentic, not just historically. So not just with respect to the fact that it covered the historical Jesus, but also in terms of it being constituting a miraculous image as
Yeah.
proof for the truth of Christianity there.
Yeah. Awesome. You said that, Del, that Gary Habermas introduced you. Was that via? Do you mean kind of watching him, or did you actually have some interaction with him on that side of things?
I've had lots of interaction with him.
Oh,
Yeah,
since, yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah.
initially, was it initially kind of you met him, or was it initially just seen him online, or whatever it was at that point?
I think it was initially it was through talking to him because I
Yeah.
remember the first time it was at my first job when one of the atheists who was kind of challenged me at that time, they mentioned like, what's your take on the Shroud of Turin? And that I was like, I knew nothing. I was just like, oh, it's a Roman Catholic relic. But it wasn't until I started actually talking to Gary around 2009, 2010, and he brought up the Shroud, and I was like, what, a Protestant is actually considering this? So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Awesome. Excellent. Well, yeah, I mean, thanks for the introduction. I know you've I've seen the wealth of your channel and your debates and your knowledge, hence why I invited you, and thank God
and
you
you're still
accepted.
and you're still sane after watching my shows. Geez, well,
Uh, Yeah, I enjoy. I mean, because you always have yourself, you're knowledgeable, and you also have pro and skeptic, very good detailed speakers on their retrospective kind of research and subjects. So it's always very enjoyable. I normally listen to it whilst I'm working. I'm probably getting less work done than I should, but anyhow. But
it's just going to get worse with the podcast. Trust me. So.
So I mean that kind of today we've got a kind of a few subjects to go into, and hopefully we'll do an additional episode as well, and then hopefully some live shows eventually. I mean the first thing, I mean, was there anything else you wanted to say from your introduction to start with, Del? Apologies, I cut you off there.
Yeah, no problem. I
Awesome.
think that pretty much covers me and my kind of relationship to the Shroud and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So yeah.
So kind of the first thing I've got on mine, and depending if your slides are in that order, which I think they are, is kind of the radiocarbon dating. and that side of things, and kind of what your view on that is, and what you think those results showed, because I know they show certain results, but I know there's also potential issues with them, and the theories around that as well. If you could, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So I've done a bunch of shows on the 1988 carbon 14 dating. So just
Yeah,
for those who are unaware, in 1988, Team 3 AMS Carbon 14 Labs dated the Shroud of Turin, and in a journal called Nature in 1989, they posted the results. Hey, it's medieval. It's a fake. All you Christians who believe in this, you're fools. It's a fake type deal. Now, obviously, the pro shroud side, we haven't gone away. Shockingly enough, the carbon 14 does not constitute disproof of the shroud.
yeah,
And I just kind of wanted to, well, what's the reason for that? Why would I, as a pro shroud guy, say, look, we got this date, but you would be unjustified in believing that the shroud is in fact medieval in terms of its actual calendar age on the basis of the carbon 14 alone. And there are several reasons as to why that is. So the first and the most obvious is, look, they only dated a single shroud sample, one location on the shroud. And every carbon 14 scientist in the world, every
yeah,
archaeologist in the world, that's just rubbish. I'm sorry. You have to
yeah,
read it from different areas because, yeah. So I've got a couple quotes here. So Bill Meacham, a famous archaeologist, he's still making the rounds on SSG, giving great knowledgeable posts and stuff. But he says, look, this was before they did the dating. He says no responsible radiocarbon scientist would claim that it was proven that all contaminants have been removed and that the dating range produced for a single sample was without doubt its actual calendar age. Now, the Shroud skeptics in your audience are going to say, well, who cares? Bill Meacham here, he's a pro Shroud guy. He's just one of those crazy Shroudists. So, you're not going to take his word for it. Okay, well, great. How about I quote Dr. Harry Gove? This was the ultimate Shroud skeptic. This was the Richard Dawkins in terms of the Shroud
yeah,
back in the late 1980s. He was the guy who invented AMS carbon 14 dating, the technique used on the Shroud, about 10 years prior to the dating of it. And trust me, this guy hated pro Shroud people. He thought the Shroud was a fake. He desperately even wanted to prove that it was a fake. And even he said when he found out that the procedure was changed from having 7 labs down to just 3 labs dating, and the 3 sample locations from different parts on the cloth down to just the one, even he said, quote unquote, this is bound to produce a dating result that will be questioned in strictly scientific terms by
yeah,
many scientists around the world, who will be very skeptical of the arbitrarily small statistical basis for our testing. The use of a single sample is ill advised as it will not generate a reliable date, but will rather give rise to world controversy. We
yeah,
suggest that it would be better not to date the shroud at all. So yeah, that's kind of the first reason that I would say you're unjustified if you're just saying, well, look, they carbon dated it to the medieval period, therefore it is medieval. Nope, I would say no. So that's my first reason. Do you want me to move on to the second, or do you have questions about that?
yeah. No, no. I mean, it's probably not a question. It's probably more of an agreement to that actual quote, because, as you said, if if the standard should be to do multiple samples throughout the shroud, then why do it on one area at all? Because, as you said, all it's done is cause more controversy than anything else. So no, that makes total sense. And I mean, I suppose my question actually to that, not that anyone would know, but I'm assuming that carbon dating is never going to happen on it again, with the level of destruction that would need to take place across it. And unless technologies change in the future, it's something that's never going to be. So, I mean, at the best case, that I think with that, from my perspective, I always say it's inconclusive because of, for that reason. But yeah, no, please continue. That was just more of me adding my side of it. But yeah, please do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Great. That's a great point too. And I would say the technology has come so far that we don't even really need to destroy stuff. We can just get
Yeah,
a couple threads, and we've already got threads that have been removed already. So we could technically carbon date those to test kind of thing. But in terms of carbon dating the shroud itself, I usually never say this, but I should. Since 2002, this is not going to work because there was this restoration project, and that apparently did damaged its ability to be carbon dated and produce reliable results as well. So we can't go to the cloth to date it anyways. It has to be on material that's already
Yeah.
been removed, if anything. So okay, cool. So the second reason I would say you as a skeptic are unjustified in believing the shroud is actually medieval on the carbon dating is there is various scientific and empirical evidence that this one sample location they took was actually non-representative to the rest of the cloth. So, you always hear this, Joe Marino, he's my friend who invented the invisible reweave
Yeah.
hypothesis. We'll find out about that. But look, there is cotton interwoven into the linen threads only in this one sample location. It's cotton is not found anywhere else on the shroud, woven into the material and that sort of thing. It's in this location, and that is perhaps suggestive that the material is not representative to the rest of the
Okay.
cloth. There's also Dr. Al Adler found certain salt findings. Giovanni Righi and even Harry Gove himself admitted there was various ordinary contamination, wax, tallow, starch contamination, if you remember Ray
Yeah.
Rogers. And also there's this helpful visual image of what's called the blue quad mosaic. So I have that here. You can see this
Yeah.
is the corner that was carbon dated. See how it's colored blue based on the chemical composition there, which suggests it's not representative to the rest of the shroud cloth there, and is possibly why we got a false medieval date. So yeah, all right. So that's the second reason is
Cool.
that there is evidence suggesting that piece is non-representative to the cloth. All right. Last but not least, my favorite is beloved Bob Rucker, my friend Bob. And it's been statistically proven back in 2017. Tristan Casabianca threatened the British Museum with the Freedom of Information Act, and they were forced to reveal all 16 of the raw dates or data that they
Yeah.
got. They only published 12 in 1989, so they kind of fudged the data a little bit to make it work. Once the full data was properly revealed to the public, various statisticians went to work and totally falsified the findings as having a 95% degree of certainty. So you can kind of see the range of the dates got by each of the three labs. In 1988, they would say, well, 1260 was the line of best fit.
Yeah.
Okay, is it? It's really only touching the results from one lab. It's totally off with these two there. So really, if you calculate it out, this is the line of best fit. And this line has a slope of about 36 years per centimeter. So what
Okay.
that means, so what that means, as you're dating from the outer edge of the cloth and going inwards towards the center of the cloth, for every centimeter that you go in, the dates are changing by 36 years. It's getting younger by 36 years. So that's weird. That actually establishes that there is a 96.8% probability of a systemic bias at front in terms of the results that they got.
Yeah.
Systemic just means it's directional.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
that makes sense.
Yeah. 100%.
Cool. So when you plug that into the calculations, it gives about a 3 sigma level difference. And I understand this is all technical jargon, but just so you understand, statistically, according to international statistic standards, you have to be within 2 sigma level differences. And that's
Yeah.
what translates to saying, well, we have a 95% degree of confidence that these results are accurate and that sort of thing. If you're beyond that, if you don't have to, if you've got more sigma level differences, then you can't rely on those results to say, yes, that's the actual calendar age. And that's just an international statistical standard there. So,
Okay.
yeah. So those are the 3 reasons I would say in a summary. They only dated one sample location. That sample location has evidence that suggests it's not representative to the rest of the cloth. And we have a proven systematic bias at play in the results that were obtained, which mean we have no confidence as to those results being accurate.
Yeah, no, and that was I suppose I would say my view on it. I think I said a minute ago is that yeah, they were. I would say maybe they're not done as per process as the standards. Um, I would see them as inconclusive, which I think most people would say was the case. Even though I would say I'm a skeptic, I would say there's some meat within those results and those dates pointing towards the medieval period. So I'd say, but again, if they're not done as per the standards, then anything in that sense should be inclusive and redone if possible. So yeah, no, that's awesome. It's definitely to get your take on that, and also I think I've heard a theory, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think I was speaking with actually Hugh on this, and it might have been, is it Bob Brucker, whose theory with the actual shroud itself means that depending on the location you would test would mean you would have a future date. Is that correct in me saying, or have I murdered that completely?
No, you got that perfect. Yeah, so that's sort of the next aspect related to the carbon
Yeah.
14 dating is okay. Look,
Oh yeah, got it there. Yeah.
I've given these sorry, I've given these three reasons as to why to say, look, you're not epistemically justified. You shouldn't
Yeah.
believe the shroud is medieval, but we still got these results. You can't just. I mean, these are scientific observations. You can't just throw them away.
Yeah.
So there are various explanations, about five types of explanations on the pro shroud side. Like why did we get these results? And it ranges from conspiracy theories; those are all kind of dismissed. There was ordinary contamination in various forms, wax, talc contamination. Some people said maybe the heat and the smoke from the 1532 fire. Others have appealed to a bioplastic coating, but in one way or another, all of these forms of ordinary contamination have been falsified in the sense that they can't be used to fully explain, to take a first century cloth and provide a false medieval date. It might these contaminants will affect the dating for sure, but it won't affect it to the point that we get a date in the 1300s. So
Yeah.
these are at best incomplete explanations. Then we have there's also John Jackson, who gave a form of extraordinary or kind of extraordinary contamination from carbon monoxide, and that's been scientifically tested by Oxford Labs, and that's been scientifically falsified as well. So we know the carbon monoxide is not a proper explanation. So really, we only have two, or there it is. We only have two viable explanations that are on offer to explain the erroneous dates. The first is Joe Marino's invisible reweave hypothesis. So again, that's ordinary contamination in the sense that
Yep.
the place where they dated the shroud had a patch from the 1500s sewn into it, and it was sewn or reweaved into the cloth, and it was invisible, so we can't detect that it was sewn back in. And when you carbon date the material, if you have material from 30 AD and a certain level of material from the new patch in the 1500s, that will combine to give you a date in the 1300s. I myself think there are problems with that theory, so I don't go with that. I go with what you just mentioned there, Ollie,
Yeah.
the Bob Rucker neutron absorption hypothesis. And okay, so I don't know. Hold on, I thought I had a slide. So here's what you were saying, right? So that if neutrons irradiated the shroud, that would affect the carbon 14 dating. And depending where on the cloth you dated it, you may get a future date, right? So if you carbon dated the area on the shroud corresponding to, I guess, Jesus's upper stomach there, we
Yeah.
would get a date 8,500 AD.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of those are kind of the explanations. The neutron absorption is the one I go for the carbon dating itself. But yeah,
Yeah. Awesome. No, yeah, that's no, it's really insightful. As I said, I've actually spoke with you on the pro side, skeptic side, and I suppose I'm skeptical in that sense, but really good some theories there and information as well, which always make it the great debate. So
Absolutely.
yeah, no, awesome. Anything you wanted to add to the that part of it at all, the carbon dating at all, Dale?
I think that that pretty much exhaustively covers the main things, right? Those
Yeah,
two aspects in terms of why I don't think it's rational to believe the shroud is medieval on the basis. Those three reasons, and then on the other side, but how do we explain the results? And I kind of outlined the various ways. So yeah, I think I'm happy with that. If you
yeah.
are.
No, that is awesome. Yeah, thank you very much. It gives a really good insight. As I said, and I think it's, from my perspective, I think the dates are relevant to a point, and I think I kind of have that conversation with others that I think they're still relevant, but also inconclusive. I don't know if you can be both, but I am. So that's
That
me.
makes sense.
But yeah. So kind of moving on to the other things I want to go through. And I'm going to say kind of blood and blood
Yeah.
type. And I know there's been I've read various things on this and heard various things that it has been identified as a certain blood type versus you can't actually identify the blood type, and it being primate versus not, and that sort of thing. Kind of what was your take on that from the pro um, side, Dell?
Yeah. So in terms of the blood, you wanted me to go to the blood type specifically right now, or
No, you can start from bloodstains as well. That's fine.
okay?
Whatever is easier for you.
All right, cool. So yeah, so in terms of the shroud's bloodstains in particular, I think that it's important to know because these are kind of often neglected. So there are some important properties, or what I would call minimal relevant features, pertaining to the bloodstains in particular that one should be aware of if you're trying to explain, like, well, how did the bloodstains get on the cloth?
Yeah,
So the first is that the shroud's bloodstains are embedded into the shroud. That just means, unlike the body images, they're not superficial. I mean, if you flip the shroud over, you'll see the shroud image is soaked right through to the back of the cloth, and these shroud bloodstains, or at least a lot of them, are fully saturated. So it means that we can tell the blood clots were transposed to the linen fabric during something called fibrinolysis. I don't know. I probably butchered that, but yeah, it just means that the clots were liquefied sufficiently for the blood to transfer from the body to a cloth as a serous laden liquid,
yeah,
or at most, I've added this to what the Stirp guys say, or perhaps a moist jelly-like substance. It had to be wet in order
yeah,
for these things to transfer, at least naturally speaking. Secondly, what's also amazing is that these bloodstains appear more or less intact, as I think it was Gilbert Lavoie who phrased as "quote unquote" counter drawings. Almost, they're in the same size, shape, and form or location as ordinary blood flows would have, formed on a human body and congealed on a human body. There's no evident major smearing, alteration, or damage, or disruption to these bloodstains. So that's a remarkable feature. It's also important to note that in 2018, there were a couple of Shroud skeptics who performed a blood pattern analysis, and they claimed the opposite of the pro Shroud side. They said, "Well, guess what? The blood flows are totally unrealistic. It didn't conform to the results or blood flows they got in their series of 6 experiments." But as many people have kind of pointed out since that paper come out, their methods and their assumptions are utterly flawed. They don't take into account various variables that would have applied to the shroud man, such as sweat, or did he have dirt on him? This would affect blood flows. What about the effect of his injuries on the blood flows? The various positions of the body when the blood was flowing. Things like temperature, or was the body washed or not, or was it maybe just a partial washing? And also they use plastic skin at one point. That's not comparable to human skin in any way, especially after what Jesus allegedly went through, or the shroud man went through. And for some of their experiments, I mean, the stuff they used as "quote unquote" blood was essentially runny red water. That has nothing comparable to the viscosity of the blood of the Shroud Man would have been in, in hypervolemic shock, and had been scourged and crucified and that sort of thing. The resources of the blood would have been depleted over that time. So there's just no comparison between the runny red water they used in their experiments and actual human blood as depicted on the Shroud Man. So that's kind of my counter response to that skeptical counter. Thirdly, the bloodstains are positive images. And again, this is unlike the body images, which are in a photonegative, or at the very least a quasi-negative form. Many of the bloodstains also are darker around the perimeters. There's sort of a darker red perimeter with a milder red to pinkish color in the center. And it's kind of an effect similar to paper chromatography. And also many of the bloodstains feature an invisible serum retraction ring. It's only visible through ultraviolet fluorescence spectral instruments. Intriguingly, and I know Hugh denies this, but I think it's a minimal relevant feature, there are no body images underneath the bloodstains. And this indicates to a lot of pro-shroud experts that the bloodstains were probably put on the shroud first, or transferred to the shroud first, and that kind of interfered or blocked whatever mechanism formed the body images. Additionally, there are on-image and off-image bloodstains. So there are some bloodstain images that don't actually correspond to any of the body images. So, for example, with the shroud's body images, the sides of the body and the top of the shroud man's head were not encoded. This is what we call the vertically wrapped mapping distortions, or the vertically collimated feature of the body images. But yet, certain bloodstains that would have been on the side of the man's face or head, for example, those are on the Shroud of Turin, and they don't. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it's interesting that you say that, because I haven't looked at it in that detail, but that was kind of one of my things I've thought about in the past, that obviously the images, obviously just the front and the back as such, and what about the side bloodstains? But if you said that, that's something I need to look into actually after, because it's something I recently thought of. So it's interesting that you say that as well. No, sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. No. Awesome. All right, cool. And also some of the bloodstains, this is controversial, so I don't include it as a minimal relevant feature just because it's not conclusive. But at least some pro-shroud experts, such as John Jackson, who wrote a paper on this, say that some of the bloodstains have actually been, I think it's on the wrist somewhere, have actually been encoded in the same way that the body images have.
Okay.
So what on earth would explain that, if that's true? And then finally, there's another feature of the enduring redness. So blood naturally will turn brown and then black over the centuries and over time, right?
Yeah.
But for some reason, the shroud's bloodstains remain this redness color. And that's something that a lot of shroud skeptics like to use to say, well, it's obviously paint then, right? Because blood wouldn't stay red over that amount of time. And there have been multiple explanations, both natural and supernatural, on the pro-shroud side to try to explain this. So the first is from blood expert Dr. Al Adlin, who suggested that the bilirubin during the Shroud Man being tortured and crucified, this would have had a physical effect on him, and it would have caused the bilirubin to cause the blood to remain red forever.
Okay.
Yep. And Dr. Kelly Kearse has recently kind of challenged that, but I still think it's a viable solution. But there are things to work out. Others have suggested carbon monoxide that could cause the shroud bloodstains to remain red and that sort of thing. Again, Kelly Kearse has tested that, and he has issues with it. And then there's Ray Rogers' solution. I think it's soapwort. There's another technical word for it, but this is another natural explanation for why the shroud's bloodstains are red. And there are two supernatural versions. These are the ones that I go for. So, obviously John Jackson thinks that the shroud images were created through ultraviolet radiation. And Paulo de Lazaro has done experiments actually showing that ultraviolet radiation would keep the bloodstains enduringly red. So there's some scientific data on that front. And others scientists have also said that neutron irradiation would also keep the shroud's bloodstains red, or perhaps some combination of neutron and ultraviolet irradiation working together.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are the explanations there. All right, cool. Any questions or?
No, nothing on that. Very detailed, and yeah, I think, as I said, just my kind of my initial when I saw the shroud and thought mine was a very much a visual. Why is there not? I didn't see much blood on the side, but you said there is. That's for me to look into, but mine's a very unscientific visual interpretation of that as such. But no, thank you. No,
No
that's awesome.
worries. No. Awesome. Awesome. All right, cool. So now we get into the key question. Well, what's the composition then of these bloodstains? Is it actually blood or human blood, or is it paint and that sort of thing, right? So obviously on the pro shroud side, we're gonna say it's real blood, and we want to say that it's human blood and a whole bunch of other stuff. But in the first place, it has been proven beyond all reasonable doubt. Even the shroud skeptic, your friend Hugh Ferry, confirms it is in fact real blood that is making up the shroud's bloodstains there. I would say that we haven't yet proven, despite claims and some evidence suggesting that it's human blood, I don't think we're in a place where we've proven that yet. We need further experimentation. So, yeah, it's definitely real blood, and the findings are consistent with it being human blood and not cow blood or horse blood, perhaps. But there are other possibilities: dog's blood, cat's blood,
Yeah.
primate blood. So we haven't proven it's specifically human blood. But okay, so how have we proven that it is in fact real blood? Well, there's been various tests, right? So in the first place, the ultraviolet fluorescence studies prove that there are these serum retraction rings, and they're invisible to the human eye. Imagine some medieval artist trying to
Yeah.
paint blood stains with invisible retraction rings. I don't buy it, skeptics. I'm sorry. I'm just too skeptical to believe that. But yeah, so that's an incredible thing, right? That's something that only blood can do. And interestingly enough, I didn't know this, but my friend Teddy Pappas has done her own experiments for her upcoming book. And even if the artist painted using real blood, it's still impossible for painting with a paintbrush and using blood to obtain these invisible serum retraction rings. So that kind of you can't even appeal to someone painting the bloodstains with real blood as opposed to paint. That still doesn't work and fails to explain this feature. There was also something called the Teichmann test that was performed. This is another confirmatory test for blood based on the formation of these things called hematin crystals, and these are viewed under the microscope. There was also spectroscopy, which detected certain blood proteins like hemoglobin. And there's actually multiple studies on this front, independent studies that all detected this, all published in the peer-reviewed literature. And also Heller and Adler, as well later on Bema Bologna, did a lot of work with albumin, which is another protein found in blood. And this is where the claim came that the blood was either primate or human origin. And then that was around 1981
Yeah.
when Heller and Adler did their thing. And then in 1985, Bema Bologna came in, and he said he detected through immunoglobulin, he found these things called antigens, M, N, and S. And S apparently is something that is unique to humans. So that's where this claim comes from that, well, it's been proven to be human blood.
Okay.
But as I said, Dr. Kelly Kearse, who is an immunologist and blood expert, he has more recently written papers starting in 2010 and done his own experiments. And he said that actually we're not quite there yet. We can't prove that it is in fact human blood yet. We need some more testing on the shroud before we're there. All right, cool. So, well, is there any scientific findings that it is actually paint? Yes, Walter McCrone. Back in the 1980s, he received certain shroud samples, and he claimed that the bloodstains were absolutely not blood, but they were this red ochre and vermilion pigments or paints that made them up. And there are two major findings here, I would say. So the first is obvious. Look, no potassium, taint blood. Potassium is an element in our blood, and Walter McCrone supposedly said that through his instruments, he found no potassium in the bloodstain sample that he looked at. So yeah, that's kind of a falsification right there. However, there was issues with his equipment. There was a poor signal to noise ratio, meaning we can't really rely on his findings. And secondly, Bema Baloney and other ProShred scientists, and including Heller and Adler, they tested a more extensive sample things, and they found exactly contrary results. They did find potassium in the bloodstains. So, yeah. There's also the amido black test, which is kind of a test for proteins. And Walter McCrone applied it in a way as to find specific proteins. I think something to do with sulfur. I forget the term, but it was ones that would be specific for blood proteins, and he obtained a negative result. Perfect. It's paint. It's not blood then. But again, McCrone kind of cheated on this front, and I know Hugh's not going to appreciate that language. I'm whether he did so purposefully or not, I'll just say this: McCrone used an insufficient sample size. He only tested one fiber.
Yeah.
And he for example, with his control sample, he used a whole bunch more fibers to get his positive result for blood with these controls. Unlike McCrone, Stirp did the same test on many blood shroud fibers, and they used an actual sufficient sample size with proper controls. And guess what? They got a positive result. So I believe them. Their methodology was sound science. Walter McCrone's wasn't in this case. He used an insufficient sample size to make his conclusion. Any questions or?
No. It's really insightful. I suppose kind of touching upon what I think you said was in point 5 is that is it a case that with, I think you said it's Kelly Curse, is it a case that we don't have the technology for confirming that blood yet, or is it we just haven't done the tests and we have the technology to confirm it's human as such?
So Kelly Kearse, he says that we've actually proven it is blood. There's no question that it's blood. But in terms of the human blood, we do have the technology today, but it's just a matter of getting blood samples from the shroud to actually test it. And we need the Pope's permission. So
not an easy feat, I expect. But no, that's awesome. No, awesome. Thank you for the insight there. And no other questions from myself.
All right.
So anything else on the blood, or did you want to move on to the next or blood stains? You've got more. Keep going.
This is the last slide, so I'll shut up after this.
As long as you need.
Okay, awesome. Okay, cool. So some of the pro shroud claims that I'm a little bit skeptical of. I don't think we've totally proven it, but sometimes you'll hear pro shroud guys say, well, we can prove it's male blood versus female. Unfortunately, I take Kelly Kearse's position. Actually, we haven't done that. And the main reason is due to contamination issues. I mean, there have been various contamination issues that are potential, could have happened over the centuries and that sort of thing. Not to mention everybody touching that stuff and plugging their DNA on the shroud over time as they folded it up or they held it up for exhibitions. So, in terms of DNA studies, I don't think they have been able to prove anything. It's just the DNA is too badly degraded if we're talking about the ancient stuff, or there's so many opportunities for contamination. I think it's ProShroud, my friend Barry Schwartz, who puts it like, hey, if you did a DNA study on the Shroud Man, you're going to find out he's a middle-aged hippie with a ponytail, a Jewish middle-aged hippie with a ponytail, talking about himself because his DNA is everywhere. So, I don't think there's anything we can tell from the DNA studies of the Shroud Man himself. Now, you asked about this, the blood type, because it is often reported that the blood type is AB. And Sometimes people will even say it's AB positive or it's AB negative. So the first thing to totally outrule is we have zero proof of whether it's AB plus or AB negative, positive or negative. There have never been a test for what are called these RH factors, which is how you tell if it's positive or negative. So
Okay.
at best, we can only prove it's type AB. Now on that front, and again, Kelly Kearse, an immunologist and blood expert, is kind of persuaded me of his opinion. Even he admits the experiments that were done to this effect are suggestive. So it may be type AB, but he just thinks we haven't gone far enough to absolutely or conclusively say, yes, it is blood type AB. And there is also an issue of old degraded blood or blood exudates. And, would all ancient blood from ancient times come out as AB or not, just based on its degrading over time? So there is a
Yeah.
controversial aspect there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Because I think what I've watched as well and speaking with others is it that AB has the same result as, or whether it was null or degraded, so you can't tell the difference. So you may think it's AB, or it may not be. It may be too degraded to know either way as such. But they give the same, or seem to give the same result. As well. Okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
Yep. Perfect. Yeah, you said it better than me. Geez, you're more knowledgeable than I am. So yeah, so I steer clear. I don't think saying the blood type is AB is a minimal relevant feature. It may be, but I don't use it as evidence, and I don't use it to link the shroud. Because interestingly, the Sudarium of Oviedo is also said to be blood type AB, and this is an alleged correlation. I don't use that because I don't think it proves anything one way or the other at this time. Yeah, the last thing on bloodstains, sometimes you'll hear pro shred guys saying, well, we can tell the difference between pre-mortem and post-mortem bloodstains, or between arterial flows versus venous flows and stuff, because obviously the way the blood flows will
Yeah.
differ depending on what type of blood flow it is. Whether you're dead or not, it'll spurt versus just ooze out. But again, this is mostly based on not the chemistry of studying the blood, but a forensic or anatomical assessment. And there is always going to be some subjectivity in there, where you have forensic experts or anatomical or medical experts studying it in the context of the body images, so they know where the blood flows kind of
Yeah.
correspond. And they make these conclusions in that context. And because of that, well, is that just subjective? Are you just saying that because this is where it is? Or for example, if you have like blood flows on the arms at a certain angle, oh well, that must have formed when he was up on the cross, so therefore he was alive or something. It's a pre-mortem flow. So there are some issues to work out there, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Makes
That's it on
sense.
the blood.
Awesome. Thanks. No, really good. Really insightful. As I said, yeah, it's obviously I take the slightly skeptic side, but there's definitely, I think, as you said, there's still a lot of work to be done there anyway, scientifically and technology wise. So I'm sure there's more to be unravelled in the in the coming years, and more discussions based upon it as well.
Out of curiosity, you mentioned you're skeptical and stuff, but are you convinced that it is real blood at least, or?
I mean, yes, to a certain extent, but at the same time, it's that doesn't for me mean it's from that period. As in, I think a common argument from skeptics, not that I've used it, is blood was easy to come by medieval times as well. So it's I fully accept it potentially could be. I'm not. I wouldn't ever say 100% no. So yeah, it's for me. I suppose it is. If it is, then how was it applied? As in, was it 700 years ago versus 2000? And there's that element of my thinking, really. But
Awesome.
again,
Yeah,
I
I totally
you
agree that. Oh,
I mean,
sorry.
And I was just saying, I'm learning lots just from this, and speaking with the likes of Hugh as well. So my
How do you
knowledge is
pronounce that
my
guy?
knowledge has grown in the last few days, let alone.
Hugh
So
Fair,
yeah,
my nemesis. No, no, I love Hugh. He's even though he's Shroud Skeptic, he's one of the most knowledgeable people on every topic. I mean, he's been a huge. He's done me immense favors and stuff like that by coming on my show and sharing his skeptical perspective. So I have a lot of respect for Hugh, even though he's wrong about everything. But
well, the thing, and just to deviate slightly on this episode, the thing I like about your episodes and the guests, Hugh and yourself, is that you have opposing views. Number one, it's respectful, which is always good, but also they're both detailed. So I'm not left thinking. I'm not left thinking. I don't know what's they'll mean. What does you mean? Like, they back it up with something, whether you agree with that or not. But at least you can take away uh, and think about it for yourself and make that decision. So that's it's ideal. But yeah, it's yeah. I wouldn't say 100%. Yeah, I think it's blood, but I'm not. I wouldn't say it's not. And then because it's still relevant, even if I'm a skeptic thinking it's a medieval shroud, it could still be relevant at the same time. So,
yeah.
it's
Colin Barry, for example, he posits that the shroud's bloodstains. He thinks they were painted on. I think the serum retraction rings can be used to counter that. But anyways, he would agree with you that in the medieval period, the bloodstains were painted on. And how is the bloodstains kept with an anticoagulant instead of someone purposefully mixing in lemon juice or something? He thinks that maybe the blood was extracted from leeches and was painted on. So, yep, I admit the blood stain says nothing about dating in and of itself. So,
yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome. Thank you. The next one I've got, and the reason I had this on this episode was the limestone, because I found it mentioned quite a few times. I think definitely found it on YouTube. I've read about it online, but I always found kind of a pro shroud aspect. And I was speaking with Hugh and got his, and I think Hugh was the only one that's actually written something on it that I could actually find. So I'm interested in also the pro shroud side. As I said, I've read a lot on that from the pro shroud side, but just kind of your view on the limestone. I think it was it the nose, knees, and feet, if I remember correctly.
yep.
And kind of your take on that and thinking there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the limestone dust, you're absolutely right. It is hard to find material, let alone scholarly material
Yeah,
on these studies. I mean, I think on my blog I was only able to post up two papers on it and stuff, right? And
yeah,
even preparing for this show, it was hard to find certain papers and stuff like that. There was a couple I was looking for, but I guess they're just not on the internet. But yeah, so in terms of the limestone dust studies, basically certain rocks can sometimes be geographically identified. So sometimes you'll hear pro shroud people talking about the limestone dust being used to date the shroud. I don't know where that comes from. That's in my opinion totally wrong, unless there's some argument out there I just haven't seen. But it's more about a geographical link to Jerusalem and the Rock of Calvary and stuff like that. So that's what the limestone dust studies are used to do, according to the pro shroud side. And yeah, so certain rocks sometimes are geographically identified by the proportions or ratios of the chemical or trace elements that they contain. So,
yeah,
obviously limestone is typically contaminated with strontium and calcium, and both of these elements are found on the shroud and stuff like that. And the Shroud of Turin in particular has been studied through X-ray fluorescence studies and through samples and stuff like that. And also the Sudarium of Oviedo has also been studied. Apparently 57 spots have been subjected to X-ray fluorescence analysis to identify these elements that correspond to limestone dust. And Dr. Caesar Barta, who I had on my show, he says that the rock from Calvary is noticeably purer than other limestones dust around the world. Apparently, it's a ratio of 0.24 calcium to strontium there. And the limestone found on the Sudarium and the Shroud match that ratio. So, in a nutshell, basically, here are the claims regarding the Shroud from the studies. So, the Shroud of Turin was investigated by a microanalyst, Giovanni Riggi, and he found substantial quantities of limestone dust amongst the shroud samples underside, so the dorsal side underneath kind of thing. And he found that there was a limestone dust found in this, and that would make sense because the shroud, that part of the shroud was laying down on the limestone rock tomb kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So that was a finding, and it's again similar to that found in the rock at Jerusalem, the limestone dust in Jerusalem. Subsequent to that, in the 1980s, Eugenia Natowski and another researcher performed actual experiments in Israel, in Jerusalem. And they said that spectral analysis, as well as these two independent investigations, found interesting concentrations of elevated calcium and low strontium amounts in certain body image areas. So, you mentioned the left knee, the bottom of the feet,
Yeah.
and also the tip of the nose. And specifically, the Natowski and stuff, they looked at the bottom of the feet, so outside of these spectral things, and they found it was a match, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, basically, Natowski and scholars, they tested the sample taken from the bottom of the shroud man's foot, and the calcium was found to match the chemical composition of limestone found in Jerusalem, and in particular, the limestone found at the burial sites of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Garden Tomb. And this is a key fact because later on, an acknowledged expert, Hugh Ferry admits this guy is an expert, Dr. Ricardo Levi Seti, he did his own study of this foot sample and the Jerusalem tomb samples, found that they were a match. But he went beyond with certain controls. He actually tested the limestone samples from about 9 other tomb complexes throughout Israel. So not just in Jerusalem, but he went all over Israel and tested 9 different tomb sites from the ancient world. And guess what? According to him, only the tomb in Jerusalem was a match for the foot sample on the Shroud of Turin.
Okay.
So that's another. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was saying okay. The reason I said that was kind of speaking with Hugh. I know he has the opposite view.
He does, yeah.
So that he doesn't think there's an exact match. I think from obviously you've probably read his stuff or he's probably spoke to you on that, but I know he said there was a lack of control globally on the limestone, which whether there was or wasn't, which based on today's world, I mean, with the databases available, it could definitely be redone if needed. But apologies for interrupting there. That's the only reason
No,
I said that.
no, perfect. Yes, I had a slide, so let's go to it now. So this is
Yeah.
Hugh Ferry's from his blog and what he presented on my show,
Yeah.
in my Shroud panel review part 7. And he's basically saying, well, look, actually, it's not as close. It's similar. There's a similar pattern between the Jerusalem limestone and the limestone on the Shroud, but it's not precisely the same. And actually, there's limestone dust taken from other areas globally outside of Israel. So Metatron was anywhere in a kind of desert Mediterranean environment. Hugh is even saying, well, even in Paris, France, you don't need a desert. Even the limestone from Paris seems to be closer to the Shroud than the Jerusalem limestone sample. So there is that controversy. There is that Shroud skeptical claim. And Caesar Barta, he's responded on my show directly to this claim of Hughes and provided his counter response. But yeah, just be aware that, well, Hugh denies this. He says, well, it's not close enough of a match. And in fact, there are other areas where if we sampled the limestone dust, it would be even closer than the Jerusalem limestone is to the Shroud limestone. Catch the back and forth on that because there are counters there. All right, cool. I'll save my announcement afterwards. But so another thing is in 2015, Caesar Barta did an X-ray fluorescence comparison between the spectral studies of the Shroud, finding the limestone dust at the tip of the nose, and then the Sudarium of Oviedo, tip of the nose. And they found this remarkable statistically significant a statistically significant higher presence of this unique signature of this limestone dust, this calcium and strontium levels that are it's almost indicative of like, okay, he fell down and the tip of his nose landed in the limestone dust. And this unique signature matches precisely on the Siderium of Oviedo and the Shroud of Turin at the tip of the nose there. And this links the two cloths. They covered the same corpse, and you can see that visually as to what Caesar Barta's study is and stuff. Here's the tip of the nose here, and that chemical signature on the Shroud of Turin versus the Siderium of Oviedo. Now, the Siderium of Oviedo is not medieval. It dates at the latest to about 700 AD or earlier. And historically speaking, we know it dates maximum to 570 AD. That's the first historical mention of the Siderium of Oviedo in Jerusalem. So that means it's early. It could be earlier, back to the first century. Maybe the shroud and the Siderium covered the same man back in the first century in Jerusalem, and that guy was Jesus. So yeah, there is that link between these two. The tip of the man nose and the limestone found on it, the unusually high concentration there, and that unique signature also corresponds to the Rock of Calvary in Jerusalem. But as Ollie mentioned, Hugh Ferry questions that and says, well, you didn't test widely enough. What about the limestone rock in southern Spain? And he suspects, or he points to some studies that seem to indicate that the limestone dust from southern Spain is a better match for the concentration on the Siderium and on the tip of the nose and stuff like that. Again, there's counters to that. You can watch my show with Caesar Barta where he directly responds to this criticism of Hugh Ferry. All right, last thing on the limestone dust, some exciting new dust studies. And so unfortunately, I know about this through the Shroud Science Group 1 group, which is a secret group within a secret group. So it gets, so I'm not allowed to reveal any details publicly at this time, but I will just tease your viewers and tease you with, there is going to be coming out a groundbreaking new paper on something related to the bloodstains and the Jerusalem limestone dust that was found in these bloodstains by Giulio Fonte. And I think this will be a total game changer. It is going to really enhance the argument from the limestone dust studies. But like I said, I can give no details, so I better shut up before I get shot by for violating secrecy. But yeah, I just wanted you to be generally aware. Awesome. Look out, because in the new year, a new paper will be coming out on this front.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. No, that's really good. I mean, yeah, as I said, I don't know. As I said, I didn't. I read some on the limestone before, speaking with you and Hugh, and I thought there's kind of the back and forth and both great arguments. And from my side, it's like I watch certain things on TV about how they track whether it's metal traces and lead from quarries, the global database they have, and I was thinking, can't they just utilize that? But no, it's really good. I mean, myself, I need to do some more reading on it, especially I think you said one of your actual episodes there, from a pushback to the Skeptics as well. So it's definitely some good airtime for me to be watching on that as well, and some. Yeah,
exactly. More learning to do. I got him to directly respond to Hugh's blog in particular. Yeah. So you get direct counters to what Hugh says. So yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Excellent. And then last but not least, to finish off, Del, for this episode anyway, was the actual textile. So, I mean, I know from kind of reading, I've heard, the textile was from the time of Jesus, only could have been medieval. I've heard kind of Hugh's skeptic view that with the way the weaver's done the mistakes throughout, that it is more likely to be medieval. I think with the loom that would have had to been used, for example. But I'm wondering kind of what your thought and research is on the textile and what you can say about that as such.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, my conclusion is that the shroud as a textile is probably not medieval. It is centuries older than a medieval provenance on a balance of probabilities. So how do I get there? Well, there's various evidential considerations on both sides. So in the first place, the shroud as a textile, there is the dimensions of the shroud, which I've given here in centimeters.
Yeah.
And these are the measurements given by Methchild Fleury-Limburg. She was the one textile expert in charge of the 2002 restoration project. So she's the one who's actually saw it in person and measured it in person. Now, it's important to note, again, when we give these measurements of the shroud, whether you give it in feet or whatever, I think it's 14 and
Yeah.
something, 14 and a half or whatever by 3.9 feet kind of thing wide. Again, all these measurements, it's important. These are just average dimensions because we have no idea. There could be certain elasticity of the linen cloth. How is it handled and stretched out over all of the centuries and that sort of thing. So all the measurements, any measurements you get are just approximate, but they're very close to what it would
Yeah.
have been originally. And in terms of dating with the dimensions, Rebecca Jackson has proven that the shroud dimensions are multiples of an alleged Syrian cubit. So that's about 8 cubits by 2 cubits of length. That's the pro shroud claim. There is some controversy between, well, is it the Syrian cubit or the Hebrew cubit? What exactly would have been used in Jesus' day? And essentially, a biblical scholar named Ada Grossi, in my own shroud panel review summary show, I don't know which one it is, but I cover the textile evidence. I go into detail about this use of the cubit. And the bottom line is we can't prove the shroud is following a ancient cubit system, but we can prove it's consistent with some of them.
Okay.
Yeah, and I go into the ancient sources and stuff like that. But yeah, so how is the shroud made in general? It's made of linen, except for that cotton corner, and it was made through the retting process. And I guess to save time, I'll skip the 3-minute video, but basically you just take a plant, a flax plant, and
Yep.
put it in a pond. That's called the retting process, and then you weave it together to put it together as a cloth, basically. So one thing that's amazing here is that the shroud is, to be a bit cheeky, almost supernaturally flexible. It's not brittle. All the other textiles, and this is whether it's medieval or first century, it's too flexible. It's in too much of a good condition. It's almost like the feel of a modern day T-shirt. Even if this thing dates to the 1300s, it should be way more brittle than that, just like all other textiles are. So this thing's been amazingly preserved, or maybe even supernaturally preserved. Who knows? But there's something going on there in terms of its preservation. So also along one of the sides, there is an entire strip that's been taken off of the shroud and looks like it's been sewn back in or stitched back in. Some people like John Jackson will argue that, well, this was the strip. It was ripped off and it was used to tie or bind the shroud to Jesus' body in the tomb. I don't think that's true. I think because there's no stretching and stuff like that, it looks like the manufacturer must have made a mistake, and then he sewed this strip back on immediately during the manufacturing process. So yeah. Also, in terms of dating, Methchild Fleury-Limburg, she found that the stitching pattern of the seam is actually most similar to the stitching found in the hem found in cloths at the tombs of Masada, which is the Jewish fortress between 70 and 73 AD. The Zealots were living there fighting against the Romans until they were finally destroyed in 73 AD. So this would put the shroud, give it a 1st century AD date during the time of Jesus.
Okay.
Yep. And now Hugh will counter this and say, well, there's nothing remarkable about the same stitching pattern can be found on modern day blue jeans. It's not exclusive to the 1st century, but I agree, that's true. I looked into it, but I do want to highlight that this textile expert, Methchild Fleury-Limburg, her argument is that it is most similar to. So yes, you can find the same patterns, but the ones in the first century are slightly more
Okay.
similar to the shroud in her expert opinion. So yeah. All right. Textile evidence continued. Everyone agrees, Shroud Skeptic, Pro Shroud, that the shroud was hand spun in terms of its hanks and that sort of thing. They didn't use a spinning wheel technology and that sort of thing. And Bob Rucker uses this as a way to date the shroud because the spinning wheel technology arrived in Europe around 1200 AD. So his argument is if they didn't use the spinning wheel, but instead the shroud was hand spun, as even Hugh Ferry admits, this must mean it predates 1200 AD. Obviously, Hugh gives account. Yeah, but what about haven't you taken a marketing course? What about the late adopters? Not everyone can afford the newest technology and start using it right in 1200 AD. It takes a couple centuries for the ordinary farmer to get it or something like that. So those are kind of the counters on that thing. I do think this argument probably works. There are counters to Hugh's argument, but it's a very weak argument because Hugh has a pretty plausible counter there and stuff. But yeah, so that's my take on, does the fact that the shroud was hand spun, can that be used to date it to prior
Yeah.
to the medieval period? Yep. Okay. And also, the shroud is very high quality. It's a very expensive cloth. It has that 3-to-1 twill. And a textile expert, based on the quality, John Tyre, I think he's at Manchester University in the UK. He studied the X radiograph images of the shroud versus the medieval patching, or that Holland backing cloth on the
Yeah.
shroud that was, and his conclusion as an expert was, the impression I'm left with is that the cloth is a much cruder and probably earlier fabric than the backing and patches. This, I think, more than anything, lifts the shroud out of the Middle Ages more than anything I've seen about the textiles. So, again, Dr. John Tyre, a world famous textile expert, this is his opinion based on the quality of the shroud expert. So it is high quality, but it's not high quality enough to be a medieval creation in John's expert view. Alternatively, shroud skeptics will have pointed to, but there's a 3-to-1 twill herringbone. The weave is almost too good to be a first century creation. And there's arguments for and against, but I think that it has been proven archaeologically that actually the quality is perfectly consistent with a first century date of manufacture. In fact, we found even more complicated twills, 4-to-1 and stuff like
Yeah.
that, herringbone weaves. And yeah, I've got a couple quotes from the experts. I guess I'll quote Emanuela Marinelli. She says, quote unquote, this weave pattern originated in Mesopotamia or Syria and was known in the Middle East at the time of Jesus. Without a doubt, the herringbone weave pattern that is found on the Shroud of Turin linen could have been produced in the Middle East in the first century AD. And Dr. Metchal Fleur-Limburg, again, she's one of my favorites because she is a famous textile expert, and she actually examined the shroud in person. So this is why I privilege a lot of her quotes in her testimony. But she says, quote unquote, the linen cloth of the shroud does not display any weaving or sewing techniques which would speak against its origin as a high quality product of the textile workers of the first century. Okay, so one thing to note here, you kind of mentioned this about Hugh Ferry. There are two arguments for dating the shroud based on the loom technology in creating the shroud. So the first argument is one of the shroud skeptics, Hugh Ferry, who argues that there are certain weaving defects in the shroud that are indicative of a person making the shroud using a medieval, what's called a treadle loom. And the treadle loom only existed in the medieval period. It didn't date back to the first century. So this is kind of said to be proof that the shroud as a textile, had to have been made using a treadle loom. I need water. Making using a treadle loom. And either that or I'm going through puberty. But and the tree loom only came into existence in the medieval period, right? So
Yeah.
I have to admit, this is a successful argument. I did my dangest to find a good pro shroud counter to this argument, and there was nothing. I couldn't find a counter. Now, it's not absolutely conclusive. Even Hugh admits that, but it is a very strong, I would say, disproof that the shroud predates the medieval period. And
Yeah.
to the best of my ability, I haven't found a counter to this, at least not directly. Now, here's the good news, because based on the loom technology, there is a independent argument proving, and it's also very strong. In fact, even stronger than Hugh's argument that the shroud has to date to the first century or predate the medieval period. It can't be medieval. And this comes from an Italian textile expert, Pietro Vercelli. And he said, based on the loom, the shroud is quote unquote without warp and weft regulators. The loom that made the shroud did not have any warp or weft regulators. And this proves it must be ancient, not medieval. It must be this warp weighted loom that
Okay.
Even Hugh admits this could explain the defects and that sort of thing, right? Hugh will try to make this historical argument that he doesn't think there were warp weighted looms present in Israel in the first century AD. It took until the second century AD. I've found counters to that. We can argue that it's plausible there was the warp weighted loom in the first century used to make the shroud, and then it was brought over to Israel and that sort of thing. But here's the thing Hugh can't escape, and I've seen no good counter on this front from Hugh or the shroud skeptics. But basically, Pietro says, quote unquote, the shroud fabric was built on a very rudimentary loom, like the warp weighted loom, and primitive, without warp and weft regulators, and above all, without a single comb that embraces the entire height of the fabric. The certainty of the above can be obtained with a new visual examination of the shroud, which allows the observation of the evolution of the textures over the entire width of the fabric. So yeah, this is why I would say, all things considered, sure, I think the shroud skeptic Hugh Ferry lands a blow with this argument on a balance of probabilities. But once you take all of the cumulative textile evidence combined, including this one, it is very probably ancient and not a medieval textile. So that's my presentation on the textile evidence.
Awesome. Thank you. No, I haven't got any additional questions there. Yeah, it kind of with speaking with the skeptics and kind of your point there. I think there's more reading for me to do on it. But also, as you said, obviously the challenge from Hugh, which is difficult to overcome, but also it's there's those other points there that you made as well. So no, really insightful. I think a lot of reading for me, a lot of reading for any viewers that are new to it as well, to take off on that one. But yeah, no, was there anything else you wanted to add at all with anything there, Del? But just before we wrap up at all.
No, I think I've in terms of the topics you gave me to present, I think I've kind of completed it and stuff like that. So I'm happy with that.
Yeah,
Definitely.
no, yeah, it's really good. I said hopefully you'll come back for kind of a part 2, maybe a 3. Just get through. I want to get through all the topics, but over the course, and hopefully some live shows. But no,
It depends
really,
if your check clears or not. So
yeah, yeah.
I'm just joking. Of course,
It'll definitely bounce. No, but thank you. For those that are watching this, check the comments for Dell's Real Seekers site and website and channel. And yeah, it's been very much appreciated as always, and it's made my Monday worth it. Let me put it that way. At the same time.
Yeah, no, like I said, I had a blast. I'm happy to be on your show as much or as little as you want, kind of thing, because I think it's great that you're devoting a series to the Shroud of Turin. As a Shroud skeptic, you want to get to the bottom of this. You seem very genuine and inquisitive to get to the bottom and get into the details, which is the kind of Shroud skeptic I give 2 thumbs up to,
Yep.
and stuff like that. So I will always support the channel. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I apply it to everything. I mean, the Shroud being one. But I mean, if you see the other videos I've done, where there's an element of belief in something from one side versus I'm a skeptic on everything I say, but when there's that belief, if it's there's a scientific factor as well, it's good to investigate them, have those discussions, no matter what it might be. And this is one of those that I would say I didn't know anything about it probably a couple months, 3 months ago, and then I saw a video somewhere, and it's interesting because it applies it has so many different aspects to it. You have the science side, different viewpoints. It's really interesting and
Do you
always a
remember
great
what?
discussion point.
Do you remember what the video was that got you hooked on it?
I can't remember. It may have been Reason to Doubt. Is it Jordan? It
Yeah,
may have
Jordan.
been.
He's
It
another
may
one
have
that.
been that. Yeah, I would need to go back and have a look. It may have been that. But yeah, it's it's just one of those things. And then I've been watching videos, and I thought, wow, let's have some discussions at the
Awesome,
same
awesome.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Coincidentally, I have some insider knowledge. Jordan is working on another Shroud video, so yeah,
yeah,
look out for that from a Shroud skeptical perspective. So
yeah. Because I know he'd done. I think he's probably done 4 at the moment. I think, if I remember correctly.
maybe
But yeah,
5, I think.
maybe
Yeah,
5. Yeah,
yeah.
they're quite long. So yeah, I need them in chunks. But yeah,
There you go. There you go.
yeah,
Yeah, he does a good job for sure.
yeah. Well, thank you very much, Dale. I will stop.